In the dim light of a cold, damp library, Edward Morgan sat hunched over a leather-bound book, his eyes scanning the yellowed pages of Edward Freeman's Comparative Politics. The room was filled with the musty smell of old books and the faint echo of footsteps from the hallway. Morgan's heart raced as he read the words that would change his understanding of the world. Freeman's book was a revelation, a window into a past where the Greeks, Italians, and Teuton's ancestors of the modern Germans shared a common heritage. This common stock of institutions, Freeman argued, could only be explained by their ancient, shared origins. The idea was radical, and it was built on the work of German scholars who had delved deep into the roots of European civilization. At the heart of this scholarship was a theory called the Volksgeist, a concept that suggested each people had a unique spirit, a collective consciousness that shaped their laws, customs, and even their language. One of the key figures in this theory was Friedrich Karl von Savigny, a legal historian who believed that the German people had a distinct Volksgeist that could be studied scientifically. Savigny's ideas were further developed by Karl Eichhorn, who wrote extensively on the history of German law. But it was the brothers Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm who brought the theory to life. They were not just collectors of fairy tales. They were pioneering researchers who used folklore, material culture, and language to build a picture of the ancient Germanic world. Language, they believed, was a treasure chest of cultural artifacts that could be unlocked with the tools of philology. The Grimms' work on language and folklore opened up new possibilities for comparative study among the Aryan peoples, who were thought to have a common origin. Jacob Grimm, in particular, made groundbreaking contributions to Indo-European linguistics, which allowed scholars to see connections between the Germanic peoples of Iceland, Scandinavia, and Anglo-Saxon England. One of Jacob Grimm's most influential works was Deutschrecht, Psalterthumer, German Legal Antiquities, published in 1828. In this book, Grimm laid out the framework for understanding the legal and social structures of ancient Germany. He began with an introduction to the material and linguistic forms that shaped the mental world of ancient Germans, then moved on to topics like rank, household, property, tax, crime, and court. Grimm's description of the household was particularly revealing. The family, he argued, was patriarchal, with the house lord or mutt holding authority over all members. Women, wives, sisters, and daughters were always subject to male authority. The family's hierarchy was evident in the way they arranged themselves in public. Daughters went first, followed by the mother, then the father, and finally the sons. This arrangement reflected the family's structure, with daughters pointing outward toward marriage into other families, while sons followed the father, ensuring the family's internal integrity. Grimm's concept of kinship, or Verwandtschaft, was central to his understanding of the Germanic family. He defined Sipp as the kin group that included all close and distant relatives, from fathers and children to distant cousins. The Magschaft was a more restricted term, referring to the immediate family, while Geschlecht could mean either a clan or a family. The inexactness of these terms would later become a source of debate among German scholars. While Grimm's work was foundational, it was Georg Ludwig von Maurer who transformed the static material into a powerful interpretive framework. Maurer, a historian and legal scholar, saw in the ancient German past a solution to the problems of his own time. He was particularly interested in the Markgenossenschaft, a theory that the ancient Germans had lived in free village associations where property was held in common. Maurer's work, Einleitung zur Geschichte der Mark, Hof, Dorf und Stadt Verfassung und der öffentlichen Gewalt, Introduction to the History of the Mark, Manor, Village, and City Constitution and Public Authority, published in 1854, argued that the medieval village and its surrounding land, the Mark, were vestiges of a much older system. He believed that the cooperative farming and mixed village economy that still existed in some isolated areas of his time were remnants of the communal practices of the early Middle Ages, even dating back to the barbarian migrations of the 4th and 5th centuries. Maurer's theory was influential because it provided a model that seemed to reconcile disparate evidence from Caesar and Tacitus to the Middle Ages. He proposed that the conquering barbarians had settled in primeval villages, each surrounded by its own farmland and set within larger districts. As populations grew, new villages were established, forming their own mark associations. Over time, these associations evolved into the feudal institutions of the Middle Ages, with large private estates and ties of dependence. Kinship, while not the primary focus of Maurer's work, was assumed to be fundamental. He believed that the old Marken had been settled by coherent families and tribes, and that the family was essentially patriarchal. Maurer's son, Konrad, and other scholars would later expand on these ideas, but the core of the Markgenossenschaft theory remained a powerful tool for understanding the evolution of Germanic society. Morgan closed the book, his mind racing with the possibilities. The past was not just a collection of dusty facts. It was a living, breathing entity that shaped the present. The work of these scholars had uncovered a hidden world, one that was both familiar and strange. And as Morgan stood up, ready to delve deeper into the secrets of the past, he knew that this was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything he thought he knew. In the 19th century, scholars like Georg Maurer, Schmid, and Konrad Maurer were deeply interested in understanding how ancient Germanic societies were structured, particularly the relationship between family and the state. They believed that the family, or what they called the Geschlecht, was a fundamental unit in these societies. The Geschlecht was more than just a family. It was a group of people connected by blood, customs, and a sense of belonging. Schmid, one of these scholars, started his research by looking at words. He noticed that the word Sipp in German meant both family and peace. From this, he concluded that peace in these societies began within the family, where the father protected his wife and children. Families, or housefathers, would then form larger groups called Geschlechts, which were like tribes. These tribes could either be led by an elder with fatherly powers, or run as a free community where everyone had a say. Schmid believed that the Anglo-Saxons, like other Germanic peoples, originally had a patriarchal constitution, where the eldest male had authority over the family. He found evidence for this in old words like Ealdor and Ealdorman, which referred to leaders. However, over time, these family groups became more complex. For example, while male relatives typically had more rights, female relatives still had some rights and could be part of the family group. This made the family structure less rigid and more flexible. The state, according to Schmid, was like an expanded family. Just as the family protected its members, the state protected its citizens. The state ensured peace through a system called Gesamtbürgschaft, which was a kind of community protection. This was different from the Gemeinbürgschaft, which was the protection within the family. The state was organized into smaller units like Centen, hundreds, and shires, counties, but the exact relationship between these units and the family groups wasn't clear. Konrad Maurer, another scholar, agreed with many of Schmid's ideas, but emphasized that the family Geschlecht was a pre-state association. This means that the family existed before the state and maintained its own rules and traditions. Maurer pointed out that the family often had its own ways of resolving conflicts, such as feuds and oath-taking, which sometimes went against state laws. The state, in turn, had to deal with these family practices, sometimes even trying to limit them to maintain order. Maurer also noted that the family could be seen as a state within the state. This means that individuals were not just citizens of the state, they were also members of their family, which represented them in many ways. For example, property was often held by the family as a whole, not just by individuals. When someone died, their property would usually go back to the family, not to the state. Maurer believed that in the earliest times, the state might have been based on these family groups. However, over time, the state became more like a community Gemeinde that was separate from the family. The community was based on shared land and common interests, rather than just blood ties. This transition from family-based to community-based organization was a significant change in how societies were structured. Both Schmid and Maurer were part of a larger scholarly movement in Germany that was trying to understand the roots of their society. Their work influenced other scholars such as Erwin Nass, who studied English village communities. Nass used agricultural surveys to show how land was managed in early England, suggesting that these communities were originally based on free communal principles. Henry Maine, a British scholar, was particularly influenced by these German ideas. He used them to explore how modern societies developed from ancient ones. Maine believed that the earliest human societies were based on family structures, where the oldest male had authority over everyone else. Over time, these family groups combined to form larger units like tribes, and eventually states. Main's work helped bridge the gap between ancient and modern societies, showing how the concept of private property evolved from communal property. In this way, the work of Schmid, Maurer, and others laid the foundation for understanding the complex relationships between family, community, and state in medieval and early modern Europe. Their ideas continue to influence how we think about the development of societies today. The transformation of a free village into a lordly manor, known as feudalization, was a significant shift in medieval European society. Scholars, especially those studying German history, believe that this change was partly due to the conquests by barbarian tribes, which led to the creation of larger estates in the western parts of Europe. In the eastern regions, frequent small-scale wars increased the authority of successful village leaders. According to Main, these leaders were often the heads of powerful, patriarchal families within the village. Using their reputation and military achievements, they began to claim the unused land around the village, expanding their power and eventually becoming lords. Main also argued that the idea of individual land ownership was a natural trend that developed over time, even though he couldn't pinpoint exactly when this happened. He believed that the transformation of wasteland into productive land by lords was only possible when they were free from the traditional agricultural customs that bound the peasants. Main suggested that our modern concept of property ownership likely evolved from the lord's control over their land. Roman law played a crucial role in this transformation, especially in the western regions where it mixed with Teutonic traditions. Later, when Roman law was reintroduced across Europe, it helped formalize the rights of lords over their lands. Main saw this as a step towards modernity, as it allowed for more flexible property management and the development of contractual relationships, which were essential for economic progress. However, Main's ideas were not without criticism. He debated with other scholars like Morgan and MacLennan about the nature of early human societies. The main question was whether early societies were organized around matriarchal or patriarchal kinship. Morgan, MacLennan, and Bachofen believed that human societies passed through a matriarchal stage before becoming patriarchal. Main, on the other hand, argued that the patriarchal family was a fundamental part of Indo-European and Semitic societies from the beginning. He supported his argument by citing Charles Darwin, who suggested that male sexual jealousy was a natural basis for patriarchal structures. Despite his defenses, Main's theories faced significant challenges. The Germanist scholarship he relied on, particularly the theory of the mark, a communal landholding system, was being questioned. Scholars like William Stubbs and Frederick Seebohm criticized the idea that Germanic influence was the primary factor in the development of the manor. Seebohm argued that the manor had more in common with Roman villas, reducing the importance of Germanic contribution. Fustel de Coulanges also criticized Germanist scholarship, especially the idea of primitive Germanic communism. He argued that private property was a fundamental part of ancient societies, and that the later feudal system did not resemble the communal structures described by Caesar and Tacitus. Fustel's work, while influential, was not widely accepted due to its own methodological issues and its focus on Roman continuity. The field of anthropology, influenced by Morgan and MacLennan, began to shape the understanding of early medieval society. Scholars like Heinrich Kuno tried to merge Germanist ideas with new kinship research, suggesting that early Germanic societies were organized around kinship groups Geschlechter that formed the basis of larger tribal structures. Heinrich Brunner's Deutschrechtsgeschichte, German legal history, reflected the impact of these kinship studies. Brunner's work, a comprehensive synthesis of German legal history, began with the German people and moved through the topics of tribes, economic life, and kinship. He emphasized the importance of the household and the family Sipp in understanding the origins of the state. Brunner's treatment of kinship, while influenced by earlier German scholars like Grimm, incorporated new ideas about the social and legal roles of families and kinship groups. In the end, the study of kinship and the transformation of medieval society remained a complex and evolving field, with scholars continuously re-evaluating the roles of Germanic, Roman, and other influences in the development of feudalism. In 1906, almost 20 years after the first edition, Brunner published a second edition of the first volume of Deutschrechtsgeschichte. By this time, the impact of kinship studies and the evolutionary theories they proposed had become more widely accepted. Brunner saw the need to reorganize the material to make it more logical and easier to follow. In the first edition, Brunner's chapters felt a bit jumbled. He started with a chapter on the German Volk, the German people, then jumped to Germanitum in the Roman Empire, and then back to the rise of the German tribes. This was followed by 2 chapters on the formation of the barbarian kingdoms, but these were awkwardly separated by a chapter on economic life. Finally, he discussed the house and the SIP, kinship. The chapters often lacked smooth transitions, making it hard to follow the flow of ideas. In the second edition, Brunner fixed this. He rearranged the chapters to create a more coherent narrative. He began with the Volk, then moved to the rise of the tribes, and then to the interactions between Germans and Romans. After setting the stage with this historical background, he delved into the internal organization of Germanic society, starting with economic life, then the house, and finally, instead of SIP, he used the terms Geschlecht and Magschaft. Brunner realized that kinship was not just a set of static facts, but a dynamic and evolving system. He introduced the chapter on the house with a paragraph that highlighted the connection between economic life and family structure. He explained how the division of labor between men and women influenced family relationships, and how economic cooperation strengthened kinship ties. He also expanded the discussion to include topics like abusive fathers, concubinage, and divorce. One of the most significant changes was in the chapter on Mutterrecht, matriarchy. Brunner firmly rejected the idea that the Germanic family was originally matriarchal, but he acknowledged the extensive research that suggested otherwise. He cited scholars like Bachofen and Morgan, whose work had challenged the idea of an original patriarchy. Brunner argued that while humanity may have passed through a matriarchal phase, the Germanic peoples were always patriarchal as far back as historical records go. The chapter on Geschlecht und Magschaft, clan and kindred, was heavily revised. The first third was almost entirely rewritten, and the last third was expanded. Brunner now described how the Geschlechtsverband clan grew out of the household community, with several households tracing their ancestry back to a common male ancestor. He also noted that similar structures could be traced through the mother's side, even though this wasn't common among Germanic peoples. This showed that Brunner had grasped the idea of a corporate lineage or clan, which was a key concept in the works of scholars like Maine, Morgan, and Fustel. Brunner also recognized the importance of using precise terminology to understand kinship. He explained that the term SIP could refer to either an agnatic lineage, a group tracing descent through the male line, or a kindred, a broader group of blood relatives. This distinction was crucial for understanding the different forms of kinship. Brunner's revised chapter also dealt with the role of maternal kin in historical records, which he saw as evidence of changes in kinship patterns. He argued that originally, kinship obligations were strictly agnatic through the male line, but over time, these obligations expanded to include maternal relatives. This change was influenced by the growing role of the state, feudal dependencies, and the church, which regulated marriage within the SIP. By the Frankish period, early Middle Ages, the importance of kinship had diminished. The state took on responsibilities that were formerly handled by the Geschlecht, and feudal relationships co-opted many functions of protection. The church also played a role by regulating marriage. Brunner noted that while kinship remained a significant force, it had become less powerful. Brunner believed that the old Geschlechter clans were the source of some of the great families of the early medieval period. He acknowledged that there were gradations of status among early Germanic peoples, which he attributed to differences in wealth and military success. However, he insisted that these differences were not significant and were not codified by law. The barbarian conquests, with their territorial acquisitions and land distributions, led to greater social stratification. Paul Vinogradov, in his 1913 article on the Foundations of Society Origins of Feudalism for the Cambridge Medieval History, summarized the developments of the early Middle Ages. He noted that the period between 476 and 1000 AD was chaotic, with the invasion of barbarian hordes disrupting Roman civilization. Despite this, there was a continuous development from both Roman and barbarian roots. The most basic principle of early medieval society was kinship, which provided the foundation for social organization. Vinogradov explained that the Teutonic tribes were organized by families and kindreds, with a strong emphasis on agnatic male line relationships. While there were traces of an earlier matriarchal system, the father's authority was well established. This agnatic system was evident in inheritance and wergold, blood money practices across Germanic societies. The development of kinship was disrupted by the struggle with the Romans and the settlement on conquered lands. However, traces of these kinship groups could still be found in isolated pockets, such as the Dithmarschen clans and other early medieval kindreds. Kinship bonds were flexible and could be extended to include fictive relationships, which helped explain the communalism of medieval settlement and agriculture. The conquest of Roman provinces with their established systems of private ownership and individualism paved the way for the development of feudal institutions. However, this did not happen immediately. The persistence of Germanic communalism in rural economies showed the resistance to change. The fact of conquest allowed strong and wealthy men to become individual owners and magnates, but the institutions of kingship and tenured service also grew from Germanic customs of dependency and the comitatus warrior retinue. Vinogradov concluded that feudalization was a result of the intermixing of Roman and Germanic elements, but he emphasized the Germanic roots of early medieval social and political forms, which were based on clans and communal landholding. As the 20th century rolled in, the study of kinship transformed from a niche academic interest into a central pillar of social history. Historians and anthropologists across the globe began to see kinship as more than just a set of relationships. It became a key to understanding how societies organized themselves and evolved over time. This shift was particularly evident in two major schools of thought, the French Annals School and the German historical tradition. In France, the Annals School, founded by Marc Bloch and Lucien Febvre, revolutionized the way historians approach their craft. Bloch and Febvre criticized the old, event-driven history that focused on the actions of kings and queens. They argued that to truly understand history, one had to look at the broader social, economic, and cultural forces that shaped people's lives. They encouraged historians to work with experts from other fields, like economics, geography, and sociology, to get a more complete picture of the past. One of the key figures in this movement was Claude Lévi-Strauss, who developed a new approach called structuralism. Lévi-Strauss believed that societies could be understood through the study of kinship and marriage patterns. He argued that the way people married and formed families was not just a personal choice, but a reflection of deeper social structures. For Lévi-Strauss, kinship was like a language, with its own rules and meanings that could reveal a lot about how a society functioned. In Germany, historians like Heinrich Brunner and Konrad Maurer took a different but equally sophisticated approach. They focused on the internal dynamics of the aristocracy and its relationship to royal power. They used a method called prosopography, which involves detailed studies of individuals and family groups, to understand how the aristocracy was structured and how it interacted with the monarchy. Kinship became a crucial tool in this research, helping historians to trace the intricate web of relationships that held medieval society together. Despite the differences in their methods, both the Annals School and the German historians shared a common goal: to understand the fundamental building blocks of society. They saw kinship as a key to unlocking the secrets of the past, a way to see how people lived, worked, and governed themselves. However, the way kinship was studied also changed over time. In the 19th century, scholars like Louis Henry Morgan and Friedrich Engels had proposed grand theories about the evolution of human society, often based on the idea that all cultures followed a similar path of development. But in the 20th century, anthropologists like Franz Boas and Bronislaw Malinowski rejected these grand theories. They believed that each society should be studied on its own terms, without assuming that it followed a predetermined path. This shift led to a more nuanced and culturally sensitive approach to studying kinship. The legacy of these changes is still felt today. Kinship remains a central topic in both anthropology and history, but it is studied with a greater awareness of the complexity and diversity of human societies. The work of the Annals School and the German historians showed that by looking at the smallest units of society, families, and kin groups, we can understand the larger patterns of history. Kinship, once seen as just a set of relationships, became a powerful tool for understanding the human story.